So starting with the last presentation that we had, this was a presentation about how to organize your data work. And I showed you a suggestion of how to organize your folders and what we in our team and our department consider to be the main data tasks that we go through in our projects. But the whole idea behind that presentation was to encourage you to discuss with your team as you start a new project and as you start to receive data, to really have a conversation and agree not only on how you are going to do your work moving forward, but also agree on a shared mental model and on a shared vocabulary to discuss how your project is going to work. So for example, some very simple things that you can discuss is how you're going to share the files. Are you going to use some sort of cloud service like Dropbox or OneDrive or Box? Are you going to use some sort of shared drive that is made available by your agency? What is the kind of technological background on that? What you're going to do to control the different versions that you have on your files, and we discussed a little bit some models for that. So a lot of file sharing platforms already have some sort of version control. Dropbox and OneDrive, for example, will save the last versions that you had over the last 6 months. So you'll be able to save over a file and still go back to how it looked like before. But we also discussed that one thing that you can do is just add dates and initials to the name of the file, so you know who was the last person to edit a file and at what stage that particular file is. So if a file has been reviewed, then you can add your initials and the word reviewed to the name of the file to know that this is the reviewed version and the previous version was the first draft. The next thing that it's good to think about is what exactly do you need for the type of data that you're using. So if you know that you're going to receive a lot of data, and this data is very heavy, then you may need a lot of storage and a lot of data processing power. These are good things for you to think as your project is getting set up, because otherwise, when you realize that you have too much data, what can happen is that you already had to stop your work because you cannot open that data set in your computer. Sorry, I see someone has unmuted. Is there a question? No. Okay. Feel free. Yes, Daniel.
Yes, I want to ask a question. From your point of view, which one is more efficient or effective? For instance, we have tried storing data on pen drives, on the computer itself, on external drives as backups, and sometimes even on OneDrive, on the cloud services. But the challenge is that sometimes these cloud services, one, some of the information we save are most of the time confidential. And so we are not so sure of who has access to it when it is saved on the cloud or in any external device. Sometimes we save it in our emails or we send it as email copies to ourselves, but we also know that service providers and hackers can have access to it. And so that is one side of it. When we use the computers, the external drives, and the pen drives, also the challenge and the risk is that viruses may attack it, and the computer may even develop a problem that will not make it usable anymore, yet the data is there. So from where you are sitting and your experience across, which one is more efficient? Is it the cloud storage services devices or the hardware, i.e. the computers and then the pen drives? Which one is more Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. So there's actually a lot of discussion in the data management community about what is the best model. But one good rule of thumb that I like is a model that we call 3-2-1. That means that you, for any file that is important and that you cannot recreate, you should have 3 copies sitting in 2 different places or in 2 different platforms, and at least one is a backup copy that is offsite, so they're in different spaces. So what does my team do? We use the cloud. So basically, what this means is that we have either OneDrive or Dropbox. And so whenever you have one of these services, you will have one copy that's stored in the memory of your computer and another copy of the same file that is stored in a cloud server that is always updated with the changes that you make on your computer. And then we also have an offsite physical copy on an external hard drive of any data that is originally received and we cannot recreate. So all the original data, when we receive it, we make a copy, we save it, we store it somewhere, and then we upload the file to a cloud service. Now, if you receive confidential data, as you mentioned, any physical copies should be encrypted. And I can share some material on solutions on open source and free solutions to encrypt data. And that includes your computer. So your local hard drive should also have some sort of encryption system. That is usually the case for most institutional computers. So the World Bank, for example, when they give us our laptops, we don't need to do anything. It is already it already has an encryption system that we need to enter a password as we turn on our computer. Otherwise, you will not be able to access any files, and that kind of solves the problem that you mentioned of if your computer gets stolen. So if your computer is not encrypted, does not have an encryption service from factory, then I would recommend using a software such as Vericrypt that can encrypt individual files. If this file is important and it contains information that is sensitive, then it should be encrypted. So even if someone steals your computer, they will not be able to access it. Now, there is one thing that's very important about this kind of software. It takes an encryption key that is kind of like a password. If you lose this password or this key, you lose the file. You will never be able to access it again. So you need to have systems in place to know how you can get that key. And for that, what we recommend is using a password manager. That there are also free services like LastPass or Bitwarden. I'm writing it here. So the World Bank uses LastPass. I, for my personal files, use Bitwarden. There's a lot of options for that. My team did write a book recently that talks a lot about this, so I'll send you the link as well. We have a whole chapter about how to organize your files and what kind of backups you should have.
We'll be grateful to have the link, because remembering passwords are one of my greatest challenges.
It is for all of us. But so for me, you see there's this little icon here. This is a Bitwarden. So I click here and it has all of my passwords stored there. I just need to remember one, which is the password to log in to Bitwarden.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, for me, one trick I've been using to choose password is that I cast my mind back to my village. So things that are common, we interacted with when we were kids. Then I choose any of those things. Can be the name of a river, can be the name of a tree, can be a name of somebody I knew when I was a kid. So the moment I remember the name of that person, the moment I remember the name of that river, that tree, then the password, it would never get lost. Nobody knows where I am. Nobody knows the name of the tree. That's the way we used to call it in our language. So it will be difficult for you to get into my anything. That's the trick I've been using to change passwords.
That's a good trick. And another thing to keep in mind is that strong passwords. So usually when someone tries to break into your files, they will try every combination of letters and numbers and other characters that you can use. So the longest your password is and the more different characters that it uses, the hardest it will be to break. So if someone is trying to break your password by brute force, if you have, let's say, a password that has 32 letters, characters, or numbers in it, they will take years to be able to break it by trying each possible combination. So having long passwords using a combination of letters, numbers, and characters are good ways to solve that. And then what exactly those letters and numbers will be, I think your suggestion is great, because you need to also remember them, right?
Uh,
But then you should not go around telling people that this is your strategy. We will not tell anyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have sent here the link to the book that I mentioned, and you'll see, I believe chapter 2 is called setting the stage. Yes, setting the stage for effective and efficient collaboration. So you see that we talk here about preparing a collaborative work environment. That is when you decide, where you'll store things, if on the cloud or on your local system. And then there is a whole section on how to prepare to handle confidential data. So we'll give some suggestions there of encryption services and password managers and things like that. More questions on this?
Just wanted to check that everybody has access to the chat. I can also send out these links in an email afterwards, because we're posting a lot of good resources there.
So if no one has burning questions, this is a great moment because Luiza has about 5 minutes to go before she has to leave. So if there's anything that you wanted to ask her on any of the material she presented over the last week and a half, this is a good time to do it. Okay, then I will capitalize on if we can keep her for 5 more minutes. Because what I want to now do is, this session will talk a little bit about what Luiza was talking about in the sense of how do you do effective data management. It will draw on what we talked about before, which is data collection, and it will go to something many of you have asked about, which is the specifics of actual collecting and then processing and then creating public action out of it. And so, Luiza, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So in that bridge, you talked a lot about individual data, but do you have any reflections on how do you start to think about going from individual level data, say, for example, to some really powerful descriptives at the beginning, maybe at the organizational level? So I'm going to talk a lot about how do you move from individual data to organizational data. And you also presented a database with lots of variables in it. And so do you have any reflections on, is it good to go to your colleagues with lots and lots of descriptives? Or does one try to be selective and craft a story? So maybe just a few words on that, and then I'll take over that. And then eventually we're going to get to Chloe, who's going to tell us about the work of our department, Luiza, my and Chloe's department more generally. And so what we're going to hear really is the sort of transition from her work through my experience in sort of a number of countries to Chloe's experience in the world. So that's what, so Luiza, over to you for a couple of minutes and then I'll take over.
Thank you, Dan. That's a great question. And I do have a lot of strong opinions on it. and it actually relates a lot to what we were talking about last week. So if you remember, everyone, what we did last week is that we started from a list of all the data that we had and what information was in it. And then what we did, so we started, from this side here. Okay, lost it. Never mind. We started from this. These are all the individual data sets that I have and a list of all the variables that are in there that we call the data dictionary. And then we took a big step and we just went to start and think about what we want to have at the end. So instead of creating a lot of descriptives, thinking about what are the questions that I have, what are the first indicators that I can create with this data to answer this question. So we have a short list of indicators and we create a plan to how to get to them. So what we did last Wednesday was exactly to think about, how do I combine these data sets? At what level do I need to present the final indicators so that I can get to them? And before we start creating these indicators, we write down and we make a plan for how to get there. Of course, this is kind of an iterative process, right? By the time you look at these initial 5 indicators, you'll have a lot more questions. And then you can, expand the list of indicators that you want to create, and you can go back and make another plan. Maybe you need to collect more data to respond to the new questions and create the new indicators. But kind of organizing your thinking and writing down the steps of how to get from one to the next will help you visualize what are your data needs and what exactly are the tasks that you need to do to answer those questions.
Beautiful. So let me take over here. Let me say thank you so much, Luiza, for all the hard work and fantastic insights over the last week. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone.
And we'll see you soon. And anyone who wants to access the links or Luiza's previous work, will send the links around. All right, bye, Luiza. So let me now take the conversation to start to bridge a little bit from the technical presentations you've seen, to think a little bit about, so there's a question from Mike, we will go to that in a moment. How did I use Luiza's sort of approach in, I'm going to give you very briefly examples from Nigeria and Ethiopia, and we've talked a little bit about Ghana. So these are sort of countries in somewhat in a similar region, places that often, particularly Nigeria, are seen as comparators to the Ghanaian case. And let's talk about my experience of what happened. So I was younger then when I first went to Nigeria. And with the presidency and the Office of the Head of the Civil Service, we undertook a survey of public servants because the idea was that the service itself was in trouble, that there were lots of challenges to individual public servants being more effective and basically undertaking their own tasks. So the idea of the government, the presidency and the Office of the Head of the Civil Service was we have to go and understand from individuals what are the challenges they face. And so we had to think not about the technical here, but about, and this is probably the most important thing that I think we should think about improving policy, is the conversation. So the conversation that was happening in the presidency was amongst a very small number of people. And they said, well, we know what's wrong with the service, right? So a small number of people were stating they understood the service without really going out and talking to lots of other public servants. And similarly, at each ministry, individuals knew their own problems, but they didn't really articulate and have a conversation with those in other ministries. And I think what my message is going to be for the entire of this session is going to be technical work, analytical work, is all about improving the conversations between public servants. And sometimes those conversations come to something and sometimes they don't. That they do or don't come to something is very much out of our hands in some ways. We can do our best to present work that is going to stimulate conversations, but we cannot guarantee that every single thing we do analytically arrives at a policy outcome. Public action is going to be influenced by the politics and a whole range of other determinants. And so our job is to do the best technical work and present it in a way that's most likely to affect that conversation. And so now if I share my screen, the result, which I'll tell you how we got to. Can everyone see that now?
Yes, Dad.
Okay. The result that we got to was quite a lengthy report. And I've put in the chat the report and the recommendations, because public servants in Nigeria had a lot to say. What were the key issues that they felt across all three tiers of government? So we went and interviewed federal, state and local government officials. That the leadership environment, the political environment was a huge part of why they couldn't do their job effectively. But also the way that their welfare package was structured. So the way that wages were structured meant that they couldn't effectively either move around the service or do the kind of work that they wanted to. There were problems with the way that projects were funded. There was problems with the way that information was communicated and managed. And in each of these buckets, there was lots of detail. And people gave us lots of recommendations as to how to improve things in their individual unit. So some of the things were true for across the entire public service. And some of the things we heard were true for the individual unit and the individual ministry. And what this told us was that in Nigeria, there is some solutions that have to be sort of nationwide, but there are many solutions that are at the unit level, that are at the ministry level. And therefore, the conversations have to be about reform at the individual unit level, about the individual ministry level. We're trying to change conversations across each of those tiers. And so this was the national report. And what it did was it would take a particular topic, information, and it would make very clean articulations of what the problem was and what the solutions were. Right? There's a need to develop systems of information for organizational learning. They want to evaluate the impact of the trainings they have and understand which ones work best, a little bit like we then went on to do in Ghana. So this report made it to State House. And as the permanent secretary said to me, this was the most discussed report that they'd ever had at State House. I said, oh, that's fantastic. What happened? And they said, absolutely nothing. We're going to do nothing. Partly because of the politics. It is a consistent part of public service in Nigeria that it's been a struggle to do public administration reform. But we changed the conversation. I think if I reflect on this, that's because we did the work with members of the service from across the three tiers of government. We had people who were enumerated who were civil servants. We involved them in the report writing. So we had a lot of people involved. But it still wasn't enough. Now, we've also done this kind of work in Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, we also came up with a synthesis report. And again, we worked very closely with the Ministry of Civil Service. And here we again, worked with people from across the service, had some public servants as enumerators and so forth. So followed a similar trajectory. And here, the report had immediate impacts on not just reform, but also on the roadmap for reform ahead. So similar approaches. We've tried in two contexts, both of which there's lots of needed changes. But in Ethiopia, we have an immediate impact. And in Nigeria, even though we changed the discussion, we were successful in changing the discussion, we didn't have that impact. And so I think for me, a lot of what we're trying to do is to bridge from the analysis to better conversation. And then, of course, that next step might not always pay off. That should not burn us out. That should not frustrate us. Our job is to keep providing the best conclusions and the best analysis. And then you will have cases like I did in Ethiopia, and you will have those like I did in Nigeria. And that is part of good analytical kind of thick skin. You keep providing the quality of rigor of analysis. We did some interesting things in Ethiopia that we didn't do in Nigeria. To the whole of the group organizing the survey, we would send out monthly topic-based kind of newsletters. And then we would say, let's take a topic that matters to them, and we will use graphs from the individual survey to actually change the conversation in the service. And why did we do that? Because that meant that everyone had seen the newsletter and everyone could talk about it. So then people started to ask us about individual questions. We were asked, well, kind of what does the gender ratio in pay look like in Ethiopia? And so we could respond to individual questions. And so the newsletter could be directly responding to that individual question. Did you know that Ethiopia has one of the lowest female to male public pay ratios in the world? And that became a topic of conversation in the individual case. In Ethiopia and in Ghana, we produced a newsletter, a brief for each individual ministry. And so we tried to take the data we had and change the conversation at the national level or the organizational level, and we tried to stimulate it by focusing in on very specific topics that may have been of interest at that moment in that particular organization. So my stories in Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Ghana are that there's mixed success, but the successes are an antidote to the fact that you are going to have failings, that there are going to be times when, even though you get as far as changing the conversation, nothing's going to happen. So how do I get to actually producing something that motivates the conversation, if that's the point of what we're trying to do? So we would like this to be a bit of a lab session. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Chloe speak. But while you do that, I'm going to ask you to download this data here. So I've put up anonymized data from the Nigeria case. So this is data from Nigeria that you are all able to look at and play with and make graphs of. And I think the intention is, can each of us make a graph that might be interesting in a newsletter or motivate conversation? So if you go to the chat, or if anyone isn't able to access the chat, we can send it to you directly. They've put links to showcase where the data is. It says Nigeria data sets for lab sessions. And if you go to data questionnaires and codebook, then you can get the data from there. And so what we're going to do is, after we've heard a little bit about this process of trying to stimulate conversations and how do we track whether we're actually improving the way people are thinking about public administration or public policy, then we're going to actually do some of that work using this data. If you double click this zip file, what you're going to receive is these items: a CSV data file, a codebook which explains every variable, and then the two questionnaires that I used when I was surveying public officials in Nigeria. So while Chloe's speaking, if you'd like to do this lab session with us, I'd ask you to download this zip file, open it, and then make sure that you can open the CSV file, probably in Excel. And then also, if you want, have a look at these other documents. So let me now go back to Chloe, and we can hear a little bit more about that process from the analytics through to the in public action, and then we can practice doing some of that work here. All right. So Chloe, lovely to have you with us. Maybe if you say a few words of introduction about yourself, and then we can move on.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dan. Always excited to talk about myself. It's great to meet everyone here. So my name is Chloe Fernandez. I'm also a part of DIME. I more specifically work on our social protection and fragility, conflict and violence agenda, a lot in the Sahel, but I also manage our monitoring system and our policy influence framework, I would say, here at DIME, and this is why I'm here today. If anything doesn't make sense, if you have any questions, if you want to stop me along the way, please go ahead. I'm sure that's what you've been doing until now. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable. As I reminded Dan yesterday, Ghana is actually the first country I traveled to in Africa about 12 years ago. So it's got a special place in my heart. And I'm really excited to learn more from all of you today. Let me see if I can share my screen. That's always the hardest part. Let me know if you see it. Yes, okay, perfect. So I believe until now, well, it's now in your last session and what Luiza summarized this morning, it was a lot about data analytics, how you can use data to learn from your project, how to best manipulate it, etc. And then Dan went a bit more into some influence that they've had on other governments' projects. So, for example, the one he just mentioned in Ethiopia, but also the work that was done in Ghana. So I'm going to go into a little bit more of the, I guess, practical side of it, how we can do this, hopefully with some examples. And ideally, this makes sense. So basically, the question, right, is how can we use data? So everyday data that you would collect, but also the evidence, so the IE research results, etc., to inform and transform policymaking, right? So what we want to do is not just learn from our projects and the results of our projects to improve policy, but we also want to see what can we do throughout the project lifecycle to improve, what is happening within a specific country, the capacity of the counterparts, people that you're working with, etc. But I think just as a start, we can all agree, right, that when we're implementing something, when we have a new program or a new policy, I hope we all have the same goal, right, is that we're trying to improve things over time and increase effectiveness. That's really a common goal that we all have. Now, the question is, how can we generate change, right? How can we transform policy? And so typically in our line of work, at least at DIME, and I'm sure when interacting with you and probably when you work also, what we try to think of is, okay, we're going to do this big program. We're going to try to improve civil service, for example, in Ghana or Ethiopia. And we're going to see what happens at the end of our program. What did we learn from it, right? For example, with an impact evaluation, and use these results for upcoming programs or future policies. That's what we try to tend to do, really, right? Bridge the gap between research, evidence, and what actually happens on the ground. And as we know, that's not always that evident, but it can be so much more. And so this is what I'm going to try to talk about today, is that there are actually many opportunities to learn from and to use the evidence and data that is coming from a specific program. So we don't just have to wait for the results. It doesn't have to be this big bam at the end. It can really be a lot of things throughout the way. So this slide is a little bit boring, but the next ones will be better. So how can we inform policies, right? How can we see if we even did inform them? So it's not just how can we inform them, but how can we measure that? And this is something that's complicated, right? Because there's so many layers to it. And there's so many ways of defining, influence of policy. And so what we've done here at DIME, and I'm not going to take full credit for this, it's been a big team effort, and this was led by our director, Ariana, initially, is to try to develop a framework of change. So how can we improve, basically, policies, and how can we measure that? What indicators do we need to be able to do that? So really try to think through a theory of change of how this can happen. And so to do this, we developed basically a data collection system on our research, right? So we collect a lot of data when we work with you, but then also actually we also collect data on our own work, meaning that, for example, Dan, every year he has to enter a lot of information on his work that he has with us at Dime, and a lot of, who is he working with, where, why, what are the objectives, how many times does he meet with his counterparts, what products were written, everything, basically, and it takes a bit of time, but this is what will help us then understand what happened throughout the project. So here we really are trying to learn how a project is implemented and how we can best learn from it. And once we collect this data, we will collect it internally and then externally with, for example, government counterparts, and use this information to first confirm that what Dan said is correct, that he's not making up lies, but then second, try and see what happened, right, in reality. And so policy influence is something that's defined a bit loosely, but it's a set of decisions and actions that are taken by the project, program managers, but also policymakers to inform the process. And this is motivated by the data that would be generated through an impact evaluation, but also it could be any data, analytics and evidence. So, and I'm not going to go into details on this because I want to go really into the practical side of it, but basically, as we start working, let's say us as a research department, right, with operational teams, could it be from the World Bank, the project teams, but more importantly, government counterparts such as you, we come in thinking of a problem, right? So, or you've thought of the problem before, and then we come in and work with you, but what are we trying to do in our specific context, right? So we have first, on the evaluation side, the research side, right, we will think about the policy problems, what are we trying to achieve, and then we will use knowledge, data, what we already know, and hypothesis to test new ways of working, of improving what is happening on the ground, and then use this evidence to either adopt new policies and identify new problems, right? So it's a cycle. We're always trying to learn from what is happening. That's a little bit more on the what we would do on our side. On the operational side, so what is happening, right, concretely on the ground is that we try to inform what we are doing at the design stage of a program. So you're setting up a new civil service program, for example, and you already have results from, the work that was done in Ethiopia or Ghana or many other countries, Nigeria, and you're going to use this to think about how to set up a new program. What did you learn and what else do you want to do? And then throughout implementation, or as the program is happening, we will make adjustments, right? So we're collecting data all the time, we're learning from what's happening on the ground, and so we can adjust things throughout the life cycle. And then ideally at the end, once we have the results, as I said earlier, right, we can use these to see, okay, do we want to continue doing this? Do we want to adapt this program? Do we want to scale it up? Or on the contrary, do we realize that maybe this isn't working, we need to change things? And so basically, what are the entry points to learn from what is happening on the ground, right? And so there's, as I just said, right, at the design stage, you come in, you're thinking of a new policy or a new program. And the first question you're going to ask yourself is, how do I design a good and relevant program? What is important in my context? What do I know? What do I think will work best? And of course, usually you're not just going to come up and make up things, right? You know your own sector, you know what's worked in the past, you'll use literature to do that. So that's kind of the first stage of where you can already influence things based on your knowledge. Then at implementation during the life cycle, right, as I said earlier, you will learn things. And so what are some real-time adjustments that you can make throughout the program? And then as it's completed, you have your results, and so you can see what you want to do with them. And so, as I said, this is all kind of abstract, right? And so what usually people would tend to do is that they, there's something being implemented or a program in a country, and then maybe, someone at the World Bank from an independent evaluation group is going to call, a main counterpart, a minister, someone that's been involved in the program, and say, hey, you know, beyond the results of this program, did you think it was helpful? And then the person on the phone is going to say, yes, it was great. And then, you know, we tick a box and say, okay, perfect. We influenced things. We did a great job. But, you know, this is kind of more of a case study type thing, right? So what we want to do is make sure that we're actually measuring this correctly. And so we've developed at Dime a set of indicators that can help us understand, one, if there is any type of influence, what are we learning from you know, what's happening on the ground, and two, at what level. And so, as I said, there's several levels of cycles in a project. There's the beginning, there's as it's happening, and that's it's completed. And so for each of these, we have a set of indicators that help us understand what happens. So what we're really trying to do here is understand if something happened. So for example, did you improve the monitoring and evaluation of a program? Did this happen? And if so, how? So we go beyond asking yes or no questions. What we really want to know is also understand how things change so that we can better learn how to work with our counterparts and how to influence change in the future. And so it's indicators, but it's also the channels of influence, right? What are the different ways in which we can kind of improve things? And then based on this kind of qualitative, right, a bit abstract work, we actually will code this for analysis. So we can quantify within our portfolio at Dime all the various ways that we've influenced projects and programs. So more concretely, this will take a bit more shape, but basically we collect information every year to see how we can influence change. So we do this internally on what we call MyIE, which is a dashboard that we have within Dime. So when I say internally, for example, it's people within our team, such as Dan. And then we also collect information externally, that would be, for example, with you, to see what happened as the program was implemented. What did you understand from it? What did you learn from it? And then we'll put this data together and see and learn a bit more. And I'm happy to talk more about our internal and external survey, but I can talk more about it at the end if you're interested. But what we do have internally is a dashboard where we collect all this information. And then when we go out externally, when we talk to you, it's an actual survey that is implemented by, for example, you know, our field coordinators or our research assistants that are going to call, let's say, you or people at the World Bank and ask a bit more about what happened. That's an example of respondents. But so basically, I'm going to go through each question that we ask. So each indicator that you saw earlier, and I go through them in detail, and see what are some of the ways in which we can influence change at each level of the project or program. What are these indicators? What are the channels of influence, and how can we quantify that? So at program design, right? So you're starting your program, and one of the first questions that we would ask you ex post, right, or as it started, or that Dan would ask himself is, did an impact evaluation lead to reorganizing or rethinking the design of the program that is being evaluated? That means, how did the impact evaluation help you set up your program? So as you come in, as you start thinking, we want to know, you know, does the literature, does what you know of other projects, does your knowledge of the area help you already rethink how you're going to implement things, right? Because sometimes, at least I can say this at the World Bank, we take copy pastes of projects and implement them everywhere, but you know, that doesn't always work. Sometimes we need a bit more knowledge to do that. And so, you know, there are various, as I said earlier, channels of influence. So for example, you know, and you're setting up a program, and you want to make sure that you're targeting the right people, right? That you're targeting, let's say it's for the ultra poor in a specific country, are you targeting the right people? And so as you set up your program and as you're discussing with experts in the sector, they can already help you, well, this is how you should target people, right? So you're already influencing how the program is going to be implemented, because you use knowledge to identify how to target people, right? Because there's a lot of debates on that. So in our survey that we did with, you know, our government agencies, with the World Bank operations, you know, project managers, with the research managers, we asked this question, and we were like, well, for each project that we have, we asked them, well, how did the impact evaluation help influence the way the project is designed. And as I said, there's various channels of influence. So the first one could be efficiency of the operation, program take-up. Are we sure that people are going to participate? How can we make sure that they participate? Are we sure that we're delivering the program correctly? Are we targeting the right people, etc.? So we ask an open-ended question. How did this help you design your program? And then we try and understand within this open-ended questions at what level did this work. So we quantify something that's very qualitative. It's a conversation, but once we get all this data, right, from all the different projects, we can see all the different channels in which we managed to influence a project and start coding it. And we realized that there were consistencies or things that kept coming up. So this was the results of the overall survey, but I can give you some examples, and then I want you to think about your own project and how, or projects, plural, and examples of that how that has worked with you, or how, if this has ever happened to you. So for example,
sorry, Chloe, I don't know if David has unmuted just in case he wants to ask a question. David, did you want to ask a question? Sorry. Okay.
no problem. I can't see from my screen, so.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on it. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So for example, right, so this is a completely different project, but in Kenya, you know, we asked this to the counterpart, so that was the Ministry of Health in that case, and what they said was the impact evaluation improved how they're actually conducting inspections. So this is inspections of health facilities. Most importantly, it is standardized. It is uniform, and it takes away discretion, which of course is linked with corruptions in the case of this specific project. So it's a better way of doing inspections. So when we asked them, okay, how did working with an impact evaluation help you set up your program? The government in Kenya said, well, actually from the beginning, we realized that what we wanted to do was improve the way health facilities worked. But even to gather this information, right, to understand how they're already working before we try to improve them, we realized that there were so many differences that it wasn't standardized, how we even measure how they're working now, that we couldn't really implement the program as such. So before even starting, they worked with the research team to think about, okay, how can we standardize this so that when we do implement the program to improve health facilities, we're actually capable of saying, you know, of comparing these different health facilities because we're using a standardized way of measuring their effectiveness. In Honduras, this is moving youth out of the market for crime. So a completely different topic, impact evaluation and project. Our respondents said, well, within the IE activities, you know, we carried out a census that allowed to understand better the target population characteristics and improve their targeting. So as I said earlier, sometimes, you want to set up a project, you want to target civil servants, for example, but how do you make sure that you're targeting the right ones? How do you make sure that you have the right information? And so this is also a way that you can improve the way a project is designed. And this is information that we're going to collect. So, for example, if we go back to this first question, and think of, a project that you've worked on. The one I'm more familiar with is the Ghana one, of course, your Ghana team, but that Dan worked on. But do you have any ideas as you were designing your program, right, and working with a team of ways in which the impact evaluation helped you think about what is being evaluated and how to improve the program, how to set it up? And I'm going to open it here. I know people may be shy, and it's okay. It's the first one. That's okay.
Can I suggest, I'm going to give an example I know is important because Madam Elizabeth and others have told me about it, is the annual performance reporting. So I think the word IE here should just be thought of as analytics. And what I understand the Madam Elizabeth's team has done has said, well, we have annual reporting of how effectively Ghana's different ministries perform. And I think what happened was there was this thinking about how to reorganize the template that asked for data. and to ask for basically feedback on different projects, and now the way that they link the reports over years. So that was developing really an analytical framework that changed the way that this reporting policy was rolled out. So the way I would map what this is thinking is to the work that Madam Elizabeth's team has done on the APRs. So I don't know if Alan or Jane wanted to add to that, because that's something that you've been very involved with. And Benedict, I see, is here as well.
Hello, Dan.
Hey, Alan. So,
Yes.
Yeah, any reflections
Yes.
on how you've thought about redesigning the APR?
Oh, okay. So yes. So this year we are actually looking at the aspect that makes it a bit complicated or a bit challenging is where we use the data to analyze, but also to connect other services that OACS actually provides. So let's say, do I give examples? The staff strength, okay, of the civil service and its implication. So the number of people that are exiting the service and its implication, and the decisions that will be taken based on the exits, and which category, which classes, is it a professional or sub-professional class? All these kind of things. I may not be able to give the exact areas where we are looking at, but a lot of the times we'll be asked the implications of the findings or the analysis that we've done for decision making. And because the APR is actually addressed to the presidency, it should be communicated in such a way that they are able to see the kind of investment that they make into the service and how that is also impacting the society or the nation and the government as a whole. Basically, that's what I would say at first glance. Maybe Jane is here to add some. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thanks, Chloe. I thought this APR annual performance report is an important part of what the team does. So I thought that would be a good thing to bring on. If Jane wants to come in, or David's unmuted himself, I see. So if anyone else wants to come in, please do.
Feel free to come in if at any time. So actually, that was very helpful, and I dug a little bit into our data because, as I said, this is information, right, that we're actually collecting and keeping to try and measure how analytics can change policy. And so actually, because we have this data, I looked into it, and this was. And so we're going to replace IE by analytics. This was what I learned from the Ghana Civil Service Project, is exactly at this level. Analytics led to the CSTC, now including TFP modules and all civil service training. DOHCS started a Bureaucracy lab and organizations to change practices. And I think you give much more concrete examples than I did. But this is a way of already improving things from the start. Now, also at program designer, as you're beginning, another big piece, right, of influence, or something that we can really improve or learn from, and that is valuable, of course, is the monitoring and evaluation functions, right? So you're starting something new. You want to know, do you have the right data system in place to collect information, to monitor what is happening? Is my project being implemented? Are people receiving what they're supposed to receive? And so how can we improve that, right? So you had a whole session on analytics. And so basically, actually, the session that you had with Luiza is already helping, right? Is if you had a session like that, or if anyone has a session like that as they're setting things up, that already helps you anticipate, how can I best collect my data? Where should I store it? How can I use it? And so that is always also something that can help basically influence your program, right, and make it better. And so a few examples of how you can contribute to the monitoring and evaluation function is, by creating new data systems. So let's say you have several sources of data, administrative data, but then you also go and do a survey and you put these together to try and better understand what is happening as a whole. You can improve capacity, meaning through trainings of your teams, right, on data collection. You can create dashboards, etc. And so this is, or new indicators, right? Think through new indicators that you're going to collect to measure, let's say, performance. How do you measure performance? And so you're going to think about these things as you're setting up a new program. And once again, the fact that you're thinking about this is extremely important, but we on our side are actually collecting this information, meaning we're collecting the information about the information you're collecting to try and see if this is a good channel of influence, right? If this is something that people can learn from and that they can use and take from their program independent of just the program working, yes or no. So again, we surveyed, right? So all the projects that we work with at Dime, so all the different analytics that come in, and saw that in general, actually 100% of the people we work with, responded, yes, actually, this helped our program have better indicators. This improved the capacity of our team members. We have better data collection systems in place. We have an M&E information system and other. And so these are different channels, basically, in which you can improve your program through monitoring and evaluation. So really from the beginning. And so, here again, some examples. So for example, in Rwanda, they're trying to improve access to from more isolated villages by building rural feeder roads. But as they were building new roads, they realized that they didn't have much data on what was happening in these areas, right? Where are the roads? What villages are collected? What are the markets around there? And so even as they started setting up their program, they already thought about what data sources they could use and how they could put them together to be able to measure what is happening in the area as a whole, in the economy, in the markets. So that is something that was done. In a project in Senegal on flood management, basically they realized that if they collected data very regularly, basically, it could be done at a lower cost and help better organize the information systems that they had in place, and the quality of the data that they used to actually audit the program. And yes, so that's again another example in Nairobi. It's a better way in this case to track subsidies for another project related to water. But I want you again to think a little bit about programs you've worked on, or the one that Dan was referring to, and trying to think of, as it started or even on the way, are there ways in which, you tried to improve the monitoring and evaluation capacity or function within your project or team? Are there ways into which this helped you basically keep better track of what is happening or learn better on the ground? I also have an example if needed, but you know your program better than I do. All right, let's see if what I tell you resonates or if I'm making everything up. So basically what's a way of improving the monitoring and evaluation function is, in this case, I think it was in the project in Ghana, is that apparently the Office of the Head of the Civil Service undertook their own surveys of civil servants, independent from what was happening, and changed and standardized a data collection system for annual work plan reporting, which is what I think you were mentioning a little bit earlier, right? How the reporting process was improved. So on the one hand, that helped think about how you were going to set up your program, right? You're like, oh, we need to improve reporting, we need to standardize it. So that's rationalizing, rethinking the way the program is implemented. And on the other hand, beyond that, it also just helped your monitoring and evaluation function, right? So these are two levels, two indicators, two reporting opportunities, basically to say, oh, like these are two big things that we did, independent, irrelevant from if the program actually provided the results we wanted or not. These are already two big wins, right? Two things that you can keep track of. So that's more program design. Then we go into implementation, right? So when the program starts happening, existing, what are other potential channels of influence? What are other ways that analytics can help you improve your program or your policies? And so a question that we would ask in this case, and that we asked, is did you use the impact evaluation's first data collection results? Or if you had other data collections, right? Every project is different. Some have 1, 2, some collect data on a regular basis. Some always have access to live administrative data. But basically, for any source of data that you collect, did you use this data to rethink a little bit about your program as it was still being implemented? So for example, it could be by, again, the target population. You realize that you're not targeting the right people once you go and collect data. Maybe they're not the people that are actually in the program. Or you realize that as you collect data that, for example, there's a threshold of X amount of Ghanaian cities before someone can benefit from a program. They need to have X revenue. And actually, as you start collecting data, you realize that, this threshold is too low, it's too high, so we're going to reset it. Or you might even just learn that what you're implementing is actually not the right thing. And so you might rethink a bit about what you want to implement. And so we asked again this question, and of how can in this case it was baseline results, but how can the data you're collecting at any point in time improve your program or your policy? And so the majority of our respondents actually say that it helped with thresholds, as I said earlier. So rethink a bit about at what point would you deliver a program, but it could also help with the target population and other forms. And so in an impact evaluation of a community infrastructure upgrading, our respondents said, well, the baseline results help better understand which areas needed infrastructure upgrading. So I believe this project is for with slums in South Africa. And this helped target locations with the most acute needs, right? So it helped understand better what was happening in reality, and then where did we want to go? And so again, in your case, can you think of any areas in which data helped you change or improve or rethink a little bit what you were doing, basically? I'm happy to provide the answers. Again, I don't know them as well as you do, but this lets me appropriate your work, which is great. So what we heard, or what you were told, is that the baseline was influential in a number of areas. So in this case, the head of civil service made numerous changes. So for example, based on the fact that mid-level officials did not believe that senior officials' accountability system was functional, this system was restructured. The CSTC already developed new curricula depending on the initial curriculum. So a lot of things happened based on the data that was collected that helped already improve how we were doing things, or how you were doing things, right? So that's another way to think a little bit about how you can use analytics and data to measure already influence, right? So it's not just about, and I keep repeating this, right, but about what your program is doing, but it is how you are using information to make your program better. And that's already a really big step. So more at completion or towards the end, all these animations are driving me crazy. There are other more straightforward, I guess, things that can happen. So for example, the first question or indicator is, did you change your geographic coverage, right? Did you, or what we would call, scale up or scale down your program? So let's say you realize that it worked. You managed to improve the efficiency or the performance of civil servants. Things are running really well. This is a big win. So did you decide to, implement a similar program or make it a national policy and have everyone involved in this? That's the first potential, way that you can use your program to make things better. The second question, another kind of win or another way that analytics can help you improve policy, is, did your program, the one that you are working on, influence others, right? So let's say you did a lot of analytics in that program. It was very helpful. Well, then did you choose to kind of mainstream these analytics and have them happen in other programs in your country, right? Or did you use the results or what you learned from your program to influence others? And then the third point is, were any of the program components, right? So you have several things that you're delivering, were they continued? So you realize that they work well. So did you continue doing it beyond the lifetime of the program, right? Did you get maybe additional funding, or is this becoming a new, again, that policy that you have to do consistently? And so these are three other indicators and channels for each of these indicators in which you can use analytics to influence policy. So again, did you choose to make this a national program? One, did it, was it implemented elsewhere? Two, did it influence other programs? And three, did you choose to continue what you were doing? And so, for example, if we choose, the decision to scale up or scale down, we can see that actually governments tend to know this much better than people on the World Bank side, which is normal because it's your own country. So people, say that, yeah, usually we do use these results to make these type of decisions. And so, for example, in Senegal, on an HIV campaign from one of our colleagues, the government counterpart told us that, the most efficient intervention or component was scaled up, and the Senegalese government replaced HIV community sensitization campaigns with peer-led campaigns after the impact evaluation, and that the implementing NGO intensively trained peer leaders for these to train in turn other community members. And so that was scaled up at a national level, right? So being able to kind of tick this box and say, our program was scaled at a national level. Again, that's something you want to keep track of, right? That's something you want to be able to quantify, because it looks very good, and it's going to help, secure more funding for future programs, etc. Also, as we said, right, influence, so analytics can help influence other projects. So the information that you gather throughout your program can help influence others. So on the nutrition project, we can see that the data influenced the policy at the local government level, with them setting aside in their budget to target programs for children and mothers. And then there's an example from Mexico that's a bit long, so I won't read it. But basically, here are some other examples, right? So as you can see for each indicator, again, all of the ones that I showed you, we ask, did this happen? And if yes, how? And this how, the channels of influence, are also quantified and kept track of. So going back to these, and you don't have to have an example for each of them, but do you have, again, any ideas on your own respective work of ways in which, you used results to influence, policy or what was happening in the country?
We could always pick us. I don't know if Madam Elizabeth is with us, but maybe Benedict, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the work that's been done on how you think, it doesn't have to have actually happened, but how you're thinking about actually influencing the way that the OHCS is doing personnel policy?
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Hey, Benedict.
All right. So let me speak a bit about the APR and some of the things that we have considered, we considered that are going to inform policy. So about the data representable census and the gender issues that come out of it. So as part of our analysis, we take note of the gender disparity, and we consider we consider these things also. So the way that this information helps us in policy decision making is that, for instance, if at the end of the day we realize that we want to have some gender parity, we also have some gender equality in our numbers. That informs us in our recruitment policy. So we have some consideration put in place spaces or some criteria that would allow us recruit in such a way that we can have some without compromising on quality and quality of the country. So this is something that we deduce from the data. That's what we have that helps us in our policy operation in terms of our recruitment support.
That's a fantastic example. Thank you, Benedict. And Daniel also wanted to come in. You put your hand up and then you're unmuted, so please do so.
Okay. Yes, MSD Management Services Department, we also work in close collaboration with OACS in their staff management functions, or executing most of their human resource management policies. One issue that came up, or complaint or feedback, I should say, from some of the ministries and departments were that sometimes they don't have the appropriate human resource, either in terms of numbers, or they don't have the people with the requisite skills and qualifications. And so what we have been tasked to do by Office of Head of Civil Service is to conduct a human resource audit that looks at competencies that are required to perform specific duties and functions in the various ministries and departments, and then match it against the skills and qualifications of officers who are currently at post to see whether there are gaps. We are also looking at training programs that are required for officers to undergo, and the ones that have even been executed. So we look at skills gaps that exist, steps that have been sanctioned to be performed in order to bridge the skills gap, whether they have been executed or not. And so it's we are trying to make sure that ministries, departments, agencies under the Office of the Head of Civil Service are staffed with adequate personnel in terms of numbers, in terms of qualifications, in terms of competencies and skills that are required. Of course, this is a very painstaking assignment that you need to scrutinize and even speak to supervisors of officers to find out performance gaps. We even sometimes have to also scrutinize appraisal reports to look at performance gaps that exist in the officers as well, so that in our recommendation to OACS, we'll be able to assist the office in a way that they will make decisions that meet the staffing needs of ministries and the departments. Similarly, as part of our work, occasionally we do job inspections where we go and speak to post holders about their work, the volume of work, the complexities, the work distribution, and all that. However, we are mindful of the fact that different geographical areas have different requirements and different complexities. So sometimes we visit the districts and speak to officers or other people in the district to find out the nature of work, the volume of work, and the complexities, which helps us sometimes to even categorize the districts. A case in point is that we have looked at one particular department and we realized that their districts can be categorized into low, medium, and high. And so depending on the categorization, then we make appropriate recommendation that high performing or high revenue districts should be staffed by X number of officers of this category. Low performing districts or low revenue districts should not be staffed with the same number of people as the high perform. So these are ways of which we are also trying to be make decisions, assist in decision making by providing evidence and data to support whatever decisions that are made. Yeah, thank you.
These are all really, really good examples. Yeah, these are great. Any others? So I'm not even going to show the one I had because yours are so much better. But sorry, I'm just gonna go here. I think because actually this makes me want to finish a bit differently, but so I think exactly as you said, right, there's a lot of opportunities basically to learn and improve things, and what's really important here is kind of this co-production between analytics, right, and what is happening in practice, and then this is really what we're trying to do here. And so basically one of the critical elements is you can think about how data analysis can serve to measure not only the program impact, but also those channels of influence, right? So, you know, even if a program doesn't have the desired impacts, which can happen, right? You implement something, and even if it was implemented very well, sometimes the results aren't there, and it's just because we didn't know beforehand if it would work or not. The fact that you're still capturing this information that I shared, or still trying to understand what happened throughout the life cycle and how you tried to improve things, how you better implemented things, and you know, maybe the main impact didn't happen, but you still, you know, have more standardized approach of doing things, for example, as you said, or collect better data. That still shows incentive to learn and on how to do better, right? And so this is actually great for reporting purposes. So, you know, if you go back to the Ministry of Finance that gave you funding, or if it's a donor-funded program, just being able to share this and show these things is already basically a big win. And so if we go back, sorry, I'm gonna try to do this. Still this screen has been shared, okay. So, and we'll share, I'm sure, the slides with you, but if we go back to these indicators that I showed, right? So for each level of implementation or program or policy, these indicators exist, and we have ways of capturing that information and then of trying to quantify it. And so at the end of this presentation, and it was going to be really tedious, so I didn't show that, but basically for each of the indicators, we have, if you wanted to measure something like that, if you wanted to think about these things as you're working on your next program, for each of these indicators, right, we have how we asked the question. And so, for example, for M&E, you know, did the IE contribute, or the analytics contribute to the monitoring and evaluation function? If yes, how? We say what the question aims to do, and then the options and examples, right? So as I said, those channels of influence, we also try and quantify them so that then we can keep track of what is happening and report with actual real numbers how you potentially influenced, right, what is happening within your program, policy, and actually maybe country. So for each of the indicators, we have details on how to ask them, what are examples, and then how you can quantify it. And so to finish, basically, you know, this is from our portfolio at Dime, but you could do that on anything you're working on. We try to measure how often does our analytics help contribute to the M&E? How often does it help shape a program? How often does baseline or data collected inform such things? Did you adopt any elements? Did you influence other projects? Did you motivate scale up or down? Or anything else, right? And as you can see, the numbers look pretty good in general. Analytics as a whole can really help influence how you're implementing things and how to do better. Again, independent from the actual results of your program. So these are things that you can think of as you're working, you know, on your next next program. So I have more information, but I think I think we're at time for me, so I'm happy to stop here. Anything for discussion?
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. So if I was to summarize what I heard from Chloe's presentation, it would be thinking about influence from doing data analysis or analytics to something happening in the public service that we would deem as kind of a better service, a stronger service. Doesn't have to be that, taking David's example, you go all the way through to a fully new round of recruitment for a new set of public officials. It can be measured at lots of different points. So, you know, David was suggesting that firstly, we just simply look at the staffing numbers, and having, you know, MSD have that conversation, getting good, careful numbers, making sure we understand who's in which department, seeing that distribution, you've already made an impact using what Chloe was calling baseline data. You've already made an impact on the conversation by saying, well, you know, we've started to think about whether there's too many people in some departments or others. Going back to the head of service, rather than simply saying we were able to have a new recruitment drive, I think showcasing that there are these different moments where conversations were improved, where we did a better job of thinking about where the public service is happening not just in a single moment when we present to the head of service, but at lots of other points throughout. And what the template that Chloe is showing us does is help us think through each of those moments. So it could be when you first see the data. It could be that you put a new data system in. It could be that in David's case, that they started collecting data on skills that hadn't been done before. And I know that the chief director of OHCS is very keen to better understand how do you have a framework for skill kind of standardization, but also just understanding where people have skills and don't. All of that is impact of this discussion, right? This analytical discussion. Presenting that you've thought through each of these stages, presenting each of the stages. So if we go back to slide 7 and your slide that says kind of all the different elements to think about, then obviously if you present to someone who you're working with that you have not just thought about completion, right, about whether you actually completed the job they wanted to, but that every part of what you were doing had an impact on the quality of the discussion, it's allowing you to showcase more of what your work is, but also allowing you to better understand maybe, as Chloe said, where it's not working so well. And so it could be that David's example of where they're assessing the number of staff they have, if the number of staff is too low in a particular area, but nothing's changing, and you go to the head of service and say, look, it really looks like we need more staff here. Question is, why hasn't that happened? Is the chief director has just been too busy to look at this report. And so that's a bottleneck that can then be resolved with the attention of the head of service. But articulating kind of where you got to in this chain of decisions allows wherever we're being held up to be better identified. So thank you so much. That's really useful, Chloe. Does anyone have any reflections on their own kind of work through this process? Because sometimes I think we jump too quickly to saying, did we see major reform? Did we see a new policy come in? Obviously, we're trying to take each of these elements of influence and try to do something in the service that strengthens the way that we do public personnel. So any reflections on your own experience there? Maybe I will randomly choose and see if we can get someone to come forward. So Erasmus, do you want to tell us anything about any work that you've done where you've been able to change the conversation along these margins? Maybe you've thought a little bit about how things are designed in your work or how they're implemented or actually seen change. So Erasmus, do you want to come in? Now I'm picking on Mavis. Is Mavis happy to give her thoughts for a moment? Okay, Mavis is asking not to speak. That's fine. One of the Solomons, Solomon Nobiamamor or Solomon Tete.
Hi, Daniel.
Hey, thanks for coming in. Lovely to hear from you.
Yeah, I think I joined a bit late, so I may have to follow the conversation a bit, and then I'm sure I'll be able to make some contributions. I don't know about today or 4 days. I found it very difficult joining.
Of course, no problem. Lovely just to hear your voice. All right, opening up once again. Anyone else who'd like to come in?
Hello, Dan.
Jane, nice to hear from you, please.
Okay. I just want to make some little contribution based on the discussions we've had. So I think this from OACS again, but it is particularly from the Recruitment, Training and Development Directorate. So the Office of the Head of Civil Service over the years continues to receive applications from serving officers of various grades for sponsorship for undergrads and postgraduate courses at the university, both within the country and then outside the country. So one thing that the RTDD wanted to understand was whether these trainings have had any impact on the people that attend the trainings. So a survey was conducted. The good thing is that we had a database of officers who have undergone such trainings. So we spoke with them, and then we collected some feedback as to whether the civil service training and development policy needs to be improved. Maybe there are certain areas of the policy that has to be looked at again. And based on the responses we got, we've been able to put some recommendations together, which are still under discussion as to whether the policy will be reviewed. We haven't gotten that information yet, but we're able to speak to a good number of officers who have benefited from this steady leave with pay. And I'm sure that the information that we've gathered would be useful for any kind of improvements in the policy. And we are looking forward to maybe hearing from the head of service, the areas that needs to be worked on. So basically, this is something small that we have done in collaboration with the RTDD. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. That's a great example. There, in some sense, you are at the design and the implementation stage. So even already, just mapping and developing a framework for understanding whether these trainings are useful has already strengthened sort of wherever it was contributed to policy M&E. Exactly. So you've already got an achievement in the sense that you've set up a way of thinking, are the trainings helpful? Let's collect data on it. Let's make sure that there's a feedback mechanism. So we've already done something in piece one. And the question I think you're now asking is how do we kind of get to completion? But in itself, it is an achievement to set up that M&E. Daniel wants to come in again.
Yes. Yes, I just want to share an experience with you and colleagues. As part of our work, again, we as MSD and OACS working in close partnership with OACS. As part of our work, as I earlier mentioned, we recommend staffing needs of organizations, of departments, but we also don't just look at the staffing or additional staffing as a panacea to all problems. we are mindful that by increasing the number of staff, it is also going to weigh heavily on government budgets. And therefore, we ought to strike a very delicate balance between staff and also, let me say, saving cost to the barest minimum as far as government wage bill is concerned. And so we look at ways by which we can improve effectiveness and efficiency without necessarily adding staffing numbers to the organizations. And so one of the things we normally look at is also the systems and procedures in place, areas that can be improved, so that efficiency, productivity can be improved without necessarily adding more staff. And one of our assignments that we undertook, we realized that a lot of the tasks performed by officers are manual. Things are written, handwritten, they are distributed manually, everything is manual. So one of the things we did, we recommended that if some aspects of the task can be automated, for instance, irrespective of how rudimentary it is, if you are able to even reduce the workload by 10% automation, that would allow the space and the time for officers to also spend on other essential things and improve productivity without necessarily adding more numbers to the staff strength. And so what they have done now is that they have given every district office a computer, and they have given every district office access to internet, Wi-Fi. So most of their documents, most of their bills that were initially handwritten, were manually distributed, are now done via soft copies, and they are printed instead of being handwritten. We also thought of if they could improve on their transportation system. And so now every office has been given a motorcycle to reach the remotest part of the way. Once you deal with the transportation bottlenecks, then it makes it easy for officers to move as and when they want to move and reach their clients and come back with the feedback. And last year, no, since 2020, they have hired a consultant, for instance, to look at digitizing their operation, aspects of their operation that I believe can reduce the manual work by about 30 to 40%. And so you look at the baseline 4 or 5 years when we went to do our job inspection and study their work processes and systems. And now you realize that there is a big difference, because now transportation has been improved for officers, ways of communicating, telephones, Wi-Fi's have been provided, and now they are even looking at using SMS and other means to reach their client, which will then make sure that officers have adequate time to discharge or spend on other equally important assignments. And so we, out of our data analysis, out of observation, especially for us management analysts, observation is very important to us. So we visit people in their offices and ask them to perform a task whilst we observe them, and ask ourselves, how can we improve this or reduce the drudgery for them to be more productive? And so we see that over time, as a result of these data analysis and observations, we are adding value to the work processes that officers have to perform in order to deliver a service. And the evidence is now showing, yes, these approaches may take some time. However, you see that one step at a time, you are making an impact, and you are helping organizations to be more efficient and more productive, reducing waste, including time waste, paper waste, monetary waste, and other resources available. Thank you.
No, beautifully said, and I think reflects. So now we can look at this final piece, completion, and say your recommendations were adopted. but importantly, they adopted in a way that they influenced other projects. So now what you have is you have computerization that's going to improve many parts of the system, and it'll allow for this scale up of other activities that were supposed to be taking place but weren't there. So what we're going to do is, so we're running out of time to do the lab session itself. We can go back to that. The set of questions that Chloe has at the end, we will change the language a little bit, but really what this is for something for you to reflect on and say, whenever I make a recommendation, what are the different ways that I've influenced, not just is the memo itself taken up? And so I think what we're looking here is to start thinking about, what is it, data analytics, the way that we think in a rigorous way about problems, leading to public action across all these different ways that Chloe's laid out. We'll give you a framework to think through that. And then maybe on Friday, for those of you who can make it, we'll go back to one graph in the Nigeria data, and we can start to say, well, what would be a good way to take the data we have to try and influence throughout? You want something that's going to catch people's attention. You want something that's going to have a very clear main message. In some sense, what Daniel was saying was, we were able to make a very clear message with a clear policy outcome, and that had the most success in echoing on through the service. And so we'll send, with Chloe's permission, that set of questions around, slightly changed to be suitable for this setting. And I think I'd like everyone to use it if they ever want to reflect on their impacts and the work that they're doing, to just think across all the different potential areas they might be improving the way the service works. So I don't know if Chloe wants to say any last comments, but for those of you who are interested in now doing a little bit the same sort of thing we did with Luiza, but actually going from the Nigeria data to constructing a graph, putting it in a memo, and trying to have that outcome, we'll go through that a little bit on Friday. So that will be the main lab session. We'll send around the links to get the data and so forth, but it is in this chat if you had a chance. Play with the data over the next few days. Explore your Nigerian neighbors' public service. There's lots of information there about all different aspects of what service life is like in Nigeria. But I'll leave the last words to Chloe, and thank her very much for her presentation.
Just thank you, everyone. And yeah, excited to hear a little bit more about what you come up with after looking into each of these. And yes, we'll send the slides, we'll adapt the language a bit. And just thanks for having me. It was nice.
Thanks, Chloe. All right, everyone. Speak to you in a couple of days.
Thanks, everyone. See you on Friday for the lab session.
Bye-bye.